Greetings, folks. Welcome to my channel and to my studio. I'm Martin from MJ Hobby Corner, and this is the second video that I will be posting today, Monday, beginning of the week. A lot of things going on this week. We have a couple of games coming. We have Stargrave. We still have to set a date for that. I should have a 5 parsecs up, hopefully tomorrow night, if not Wednesday, but it is being filmed, and it's going to be an interesting 5 parsecs, I think. And then of course we have Oathmark, which we would like to also, that'll be something that Julie and I will play towards the end of the week. But in between, I have a couple of other little things that I want to discuss and bring to the channel. And one of those topics is hex wargaming. Now, in my gaming library, and I have something I called my gaming library, and that's just a collection of rules that I have, a lot of it digital, and there are a ton of different kinds of rules that I've collected over the years. Hex wargames being, one of these categories. Hex wargaming, the print and play versions that usually you find online, there are some really good hex war games out there, and some of them are World War II. A lot of these hex games are historical, so like you have a lot of World War II games, a lot of naval warfare and things like that. So it's an interesting category, and I've had a lot of fun with hex war games. Especially some of the earlier ones. You have some fantasy RPG style hex games, and you have a few fantasy war games out there that are also hex games. And of course, in tabletop miniature wargaming, which is kind of our category, you do have some hex games that have kind of added that miniatures, kind of tapped into that miniature industry. Games like Heroescape, right, which still use the hexes and all that, and you can kind of form some interesting terrain. I've seen some interesting boards with these like little plastic hexes. I have a bunch of them myself, and we use them for various things. But what I want to show in this video are just a couple of the rule sets, and one in particular from my gaming library. I just printed out some of the components. I actually had the whole game printed out, and it got destroyed in floods in the past and everything. So unfortunately, I lost all that material. So now I have to like reprint it so that I can play it, and I want to bring it to the channel eventually. Now this game is called Barbarian Prince, and Barbarian Prince is a hex RPG game. And I'll show you in a minute just some of the components. And Barbarian Prince is very interesting because it has a little bit of resource management, but it's also an RPG, and it's very detailed. And one of the cool things, it was developed in 1980s, early 1980s, by a company called Dwarf, and they developed several games similar to Barbarian Prince. And what's interesting is Reaper Miniatures actually held the license for those games, right? And then in early 1990s, Reaper Miniatures released the license and actually put the games out for free printing, which is great. It was great. And Barbarian Prince is one of the games that I played a lot by myself. It's a solo game, and I had a lot of fun with it. So let's go check out these games. And again, this is going to be a basic overview. It's not going to be a very thorough kind of review. I'll do that maybe sometime in the future when if I decide to play the game and bring a couple of videos related to that game. So let's go check out the rules now. Okay, so on the topic of hex games, and I have a little figure here. This is the map for Barbarian Prince, and I just printed this out, and it's a very, very cool looking map. And I'm going to bring it up a little bit so you can see. All the hexes are numbered, and there's all this cool like art on it and everything else. And you have like a desert here, you have mountains, you have like rocky hills. and wastelands, and then you have grassland and forest. There's a river, right, and roads and things like that. Now, the main idea of Barbarian Prince is that you were a barbarian prince that was captured, imprisoned, and you escaped. And so now your goal is basically to get to the end hex down here in this castle, where you can actually hire an army, or get an army that will then allow you to deal with the threats to the land and all these people, whoever it was that imprisoned you. So basically, you are trying to get down, and you have all of this territory that you're going to be crossing. Now, the engine of the game is this 42-page event book, and all this is basically what drives the entire game. And these are different events that happen while you're crossing these hexes. And so these hexes, like the forests and the roads, they all mean different things. They can all affect the outcome of the events in different ways, especially with the encounters, like the different creatures and things that you may meet along the way. So the resource management aspect of it is that you do have to keep track of food, and there is a picture of the chart with the sort of the weeks and the days and the amount of food that you use and everything else. You have to make sure you have enough food, because otherwise that's going to affect you. You're going to end up dying if you don't have food. So that's interesting. It introduces that whole food mechanic as a resource management. And you can hunt, and you can acquire food in towns when you visit towns. You also acquire wealth and treasure by going on little subquests. And one of the interesting things is that you can actually hire characters as you meet them. You meet all these characters. Not everyone you meet is going to be a threat. Some of the characters that you meet, you can actually hire them, and they become part of a party. And so little by little, as you go down the territories, you may actually amass a nice party. And there are some rules for hiring those henchmen, and you can get magic users and whatever. So you slowly form your party. It reminds me a lot of the old Dungeons and Dragons, right? That's kind of the feel I get whenever I played this. And here I use a 15mm figure to represent my Barbarian Prince, and that's what I use as my main marker. And as I gain henchmen or whatever, I have little index cards with all of their stats, right? When I encounter monsters, I just use these very old chaos rats or whatever they are, but I know they're chaos related, and I use these as a generalized monster marker. And I also have like these snake things that I'll use as random like monsters. So when I encounter however many monsters, I have those little tokens to represent them, and then once we clear them out, then I continue going. So the event book, this is the thing that drives the game. Then you have the rules. You have another table that that kind of controls, depending on what hex you're on, forest, grassland, whatever it is, you roll on that table first, and that takes you to an event. So that table kind of controls the territories, what you encounter in the different territories. So in a forest, you might encounter a cave and actually go into that cave and explore it. And so it's very, very cool. It's very old school. And this game, again, being so old, I actually think it's very sophisticated. The fact that it's a 1980s game. I still play it, still have fun with it, and I'll have a video at some point in the future, maybe doing a little example of a little bit of the adventure as I play through it. It is very, very challenging. It is not an easy game to actually succeed. Really is very challenging. So that's Barbarian Prince by Dwarf. Some of the other games that I have, and again, this is not necessarily of interest to everyone, but for me, this is Great War at Sea, and these are some of the Great War at Sea charts and things for the different vessels. And Great War at Sea, I have this little book that I printed many years ago. Actually, this is actually pretty old. And this is the condensed rules to Great War at Sea. Now, Great War at Sea is a historical war game. It's a naval war game. It encompasses many different periods from pre-dreadnought to about World War One, World War Two, right? It's a very interesting naval game. I only printed this condensed version of the rules because I actually use this in my homebrew rules for, let's say, steampunk, naval games. So games where I just want some homebrew rules, right? I will take from these rules here because I really like what's shown here and then incorporate that into some of my homebrew games. Now, again, it's an interesting game. I do make a lot of scratch built warships. So these are the rules I use primarily. But there are other naval rules. There are many naval rules that I've collected over the years that I kind of use for that purpose. So I kind of change things a little bit, and if I want to play a historical game, I can. And these are all the counters that I've collected over the years for Great War at Sea. Again, I use my own little scratch-built ships. Now, the last one that I want to show, and this is very, very old. This is actually an ironclad rules for ironclads, and it has like all these templates. It also has some ship cards and all that stuff. And then it has like a bunch of little rules. And this was by Jackson Gamer, Ironclads. This is in 2009, okay? And these rules are very interesting. These are all about ironclads, and I use these rules again in my homebrew games, and I actually designed some ironclads for this game. Check that out. That's an ironclad that I made some time ago, and unfortunately, I made a whole set. I made some Confederate ironclads for the Civil War, American Civil War, and I made some Union ironclads, and they were all destroyed. I mean, moving, and some of them broke, and it was just a shame. And this was the only ship I had left, and then that one was destroyed not too long ago. So I'm going to have to make new ironclads. Now, A Billion Suns is a game that I'm more interested in playing. That's something from Osprey Games, and I am gonna get to that game eventually. But these are the Hex war games, some very old Hex war game rules that are in my collection. We will be seeing some of these games come to life. Okay, so again, a short review of some of these very old war game systems that I have in my collection, and a lot of these are in digital files, which I have to print in the future if I want to play them. But I'm working with a handmade hex board right now, and we'll have some units made for it so that we can play some sci-fi games, and I'll demonstrate that in the future. That's not going to be for a little while because I have to paint the units, I have to make them, I have to make the board and everything else. But Hex wargaming can be very interesting, especially for the solo wargamer. And, it's just a different kind of war game, essentially. It can be very tactical, very strategic, and interesting, depending on the rules, depending on the game as well. So, all right, folks. Well, this was another little chat for the channel. And then, again, I brought you Hex war games, some of the Hex war games that I have, and I will continue updating and talking a little bit more about this in the future when I have a better idea how we're going to introduce this into the channel. Thank you guys, and we will talk very soon.